Hello. Wait a few more seconds for people to join. Okay. Welcome to Whole Family Approach 201, Design and Implementation. If you missed part one of the series, we're going to place a link in the chat to our website where you can watch part one and review the slide deck. Next slide, please. We want to introduce you guys to the Whole Family team. We have Tiffany Marley. She is our Senior Vice President of Practice Transformation. Miss Jennifer Gregory, she is on the call today and will be presenting. She's our Director of Mobility, Learning, Design, and Practice. We have Miss Jeannie Chaffin. She is our Special Advisor. And Miss Tamaritas Hollywood, she is also on the call today and will be presenting. She is our Senior Associate of Learning and Dissemination. And then we have myself. My name is Katie Smith, and I'm a Program Associate for Communication and Dissemination. And here at NCAP, we'd like to start every gathering of our network with the promise of community action. You can feel free to unmute and say this along with me. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we're dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And now I'm going to pass off to Tamaritas Hollywood, and we're going to dive into some foundational concepts of whole family approach.
Thank you, Katie. I appreciate you. Yes. So we're just going to begin with a brief review of the foundational concepts of a whole family approach. Next slide. Thank you. All right, SIM, or what we know here at the partnership as social and economic mobility, right? We know that economic mobility is the ability of an individual, family, or some other group to improve their economic status that can be measured in income, assets, or resources. Social mobility is the movement, right, of individuals, families, and households between social strata. Sorry, I'm tongue-tied today. It relates to being valued in the community and having equity, sustained access to power and autonomy, because at the end of the day, we know that there are levels, right, to social strata. And we also know that mobility is more than just economic success and income. It also has system level implications. Next slide, we're going to jump into some examples of what SIM, or social and economic mobility, looks like in our everyday lives. So we have economic success, again, that power and autonomy word, and being valued in the community. So economic success will look like having a rising income, a thriving income, right, and assets, having those resources, that access to be able to gain assets and being able to expand a portfolio, right? We want our families, we want our communities thriving. Power and autonomy, having control over one's life, right? Making my own choices, having the ability for that, and the collective capacity to influence larger policies and actions that affect one's future, right? We want to be able to bring our own personal truths to the story and allow that to make a difference for not just us, but for our communities, for our country, and being valued in community, feeling the respect, dignity, and sense of belonging that comes from contributing to one's community, right? We all want to belong to our community, and we want to feel that we are in a valued community. Next slide. Okay, and so here we see how SIM, or social and economic mobility, connects to being the North Star for whole family approach. When we think of the North Star for our families, for our communities, right, we think about breaking the cycle of poverty from one generation to the next, creating a legacy of well-being from one generation to the next. And how do we do this? Why would we do this? Next slide. Why? Because we must consider the importance of limiting the amount of time that a child spends in poverty, right? Especially in the early childhood years. And we also know that there's data and statistics that show us why this is so imperative. And again, how do we do this? Now, let's go to the next slide. Accelerating our impact. That's how we do this. So a whole family approach, or you may hear it termed as a two-generational approach. This requires a deeper engagement with families. It requires being data-driven, person-centered, having a deep grounding in equity, especially in racial equity, addressing other community factors, and a commitment to innovation. We also know that this understanding, right, it compels us to rethink and accelerate the impact that we have both on the individuals and families that we serve, but also our community. And we must take a comprehensive approach to this very specific work. And how do we do this? Next slide. With the whole family approach. That's how. Katie?
Thank you, Tamaritis. Next slide, please, Denise. Thank you. So if you guys can please just use the chat function here, I'm going to ask you guys, how much do you know about whole family approach? Sorry about that. Are you very familiar, somewhat familiar, not familiar at all, or other? Tell us what you bring to the table today. Lots of somewhat, not familiar. That's okay. We're happy that you're here to learn today. Some very familiars. We have an active group today. Thank you guys so much. Somewhat. Okay, folks, thank you so much. And I will pass off to Tamaritis to dive into some more of whole family approach.
Thank you, Katie. Okay, next slide. All right. So here, this is a very full slide, right? We thank Ascend for several of the graphics that we see here. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna highlight the components here, the pillars, the hallmarks, and the continuum. But let's go to the next slide so we can really start to break this down, because that one's a little jumbled for me. So when we think about concepts, right, for whole family approach or two-generation approach, we see that the whole family is situated in the middle. And we know that this is in the middle because in a two-generational approach or whole family approach, we serve the child and also the adult in their lives together, right? So we see here child-focused with parent and caregiver elements. Outside on the other side, we also see adult-focused and parent and caregiver focused with child elements. And I want to just break that down for just a second when we think about what these type of programs and services look like, right? Because they're probably some of the same programs that you've either seen in the past, right? Or maybe it's something that you currently offer. So when we think about child-focused programs, this is focused strictly on the child, no parent involvement. And so we think about after school programs, right? We think about free lunch programs, those type of programs and service, again, that just focus solely on the child. When we look at child focus with parent and caregiver elements, we would think about programs such as Head Start, right, or CHIP, because we know that these programs and services, they focus solely on the child, but there are also aspects of that program or service that allow parent or caregiver or guardian specific elements to this as well. And again, when we look at the other side and there's the parent and caregiver focus with child elements, we think of services and programs such as there may be some workforce programs, right, that will include a child care or child element to that, or food and nutrition supports that is solely for the parent, right? The parent has to come in, has to fill out the paperwork, but the benefits of the food and nutrition support is for the child. And an adult focused program or services, again, we bring up the workforce development because we know that not all of these programs and services offer childcare subsidies, right? Or services in that area. Some of them are focused solely on the adult. Next slide. Okay, so here we see the 6 key components or pillars, right, that are needed to intentionally serve our families and our community. So I just want to name a few out. Early childhood education, right? We see that with our Head Start, our early Head Start, childcare partners, home visiting, pre-K, and then we have K through 12, right? So this is serving all children in the home that are in any of these schools, whether that's kindergarten, third grade, on up to our high schoolers. Post-secondary and employment pathways, right? So these are going to be resources and supports such as community college pathways, training and credential resources, workforce partnerships, employer partnerships, etc. Social capital, health and mental health, and last, economic assets. The one thing I do want to say before we leave this slide is that by any means, your organization or agency does not have to offer, right, a service from each one of these areas. But the areas that you do not offer a service or program in, if you are truly doing whole family approach, your agency should be collaborating with partners that do offer services in that area while you are serving these families together, collecting data on these families together. So again, it's about bridging the divide with collaborating with partners. Next slide. Okay, so we're just going to quickly go through the hallmarks, centering on families. I think we've heard a lot of this today and also in the previous sessions. Integrating services, right? Bringing those together, not allowing our families to relive through that trauma every time they have to tell a story, removing the barriers that exist, right, for our families, incorporating coaching in all programs on board, all programs, all services, developing partnerships, centering in equity, starting with racial equity, measuring parent, child, and family outcomes, applying science and evidence, attending to core life skills, incorporating strategies that build family resiliency, right? That trauma informed focus, which we know is extremely important, and delivering services of sufficient intensity, duration, and dosage to enable families to achieve SIM, right? Or social and economic mobility. And you'll hear that again in just a second. We know that whole family approach is not a cookie cutter approach, right? It is not one size fits all. Every agency and organization is different. and the way that you serve your families is going to be different. So your whole family approach is going to look differently within the agency. But there are several rules and principles that we do follow, not only based off of the data, but also based on the tenure that we have been doing this work and with the different communities of practices and learning groups, and just the time that has been put in to really make this happen. And those are, again, serving parents and the adults in their, children and adults in their lives together simultaneously, social and economic mobility. And so that means bringing our families beyond poverty, right? We want them in a status of thriving. It says here, family supporting wage. We want a thriving supporting wage, right? And again, duration, dosage, intensity, and quality. All of that needs to be measurable if you are planning to implement a whole family approach. Next slide, please. And how do organizations implement a whole family approach? I believe that Jennifer is going to lead us on the platforms for implementation.
Thank you to Meredith and Katie, and thank you all for joining us again today for Whole Family Approach 201. We did, again, do a really quick overview of what Whole Family Approach is and what it isn't. As a foundational starting point to jumping into design and implementation today. But we do encourage you, if you were not on last month's webinar, where we dove deeper into Whole Family Approach 101, do encourage you to go back and watch that recording, as well as visiting our website and our Whole Family Approach landing page on the Community Action Partnerships website, where there is a plethora of other resources available in helping you to develop your understanding of what Whole Family Approach is, and again, what it isn't. For the sake of today, we're going to jump straight into design and implementation. But as we do this, what's critical for us to remember from all that's been said so far about what Whole Family Approach is to remember that what Whole Family Approach isn't is a program. It is an approach, as its name indicates. It is a framework. It is a way of doing business. It's how we engage with families and children and the adults in their lives. We have seen whole family approaches applied to programs within organizations that then start as a pilot to see how this approach works in our organization and the way we do business. But ultimately, the goal is for whole family approach to permeate into all areas of an agency. And again, putting the family at the center of the work that we're doing. And so where does this start? So you've been through Whole Family Approach 101, hopefully, or you've at least gotten the overview today. You're here because you're curious about Whole Family Approach and how you can apply it to the work that you're doing with families in your community. So where do we start? Next slide, please. There are a variety of platforms that you can use to help launch your Whole Family Approach implementation initiatives. You hear us lift up Head Start. I am a former Head Start mom myself. Have a great affinity for Head Start, but Head Start is not necessary for an organization if they're wanting to launch a whole family approach. You certainly, as Tamira indicated when we looked at the slide with the core components of a whole family approach, you certainly wanted to have access to resources and interventions that will benefit younger children. And so if your organization happens to be one of those that does not administer Head Start, then you would be encouraged to connect with other resources within your community that do provide services for young children to round out the full comprehensive and holistic service offering that you're providing for families. But Head Start, if you do have Head Start, or if you have a partnership with Head Start in your community, Head Start's an excellent platform on which to launch your whole family approach. And we'll go into that a little bit deeper in a moment. Whole family approach, while We use that term most frequently here within community action. It is akin to the two-gen or two-generation approach that's used more broadly in the human services sector. So it's not limited only to community action agencies. I don't know, we may have some community-based organization partners who are joining us today who are outside of the Community Action Network. And if that's the case, welcome. We're glad that you're here because, again, whole family approach is not exclusive to community action. It's the term we use most frequently here at the partnership, but you will see two-gen or two-generation platforms applied to human services work across the sector. Even in workforce development and at community colleges, we're seeing a rise of community colleges and universities being respondent to student parents and endeavoring to service the entire family, not just the students and their children as adjacent add-on pieces. United Ways, women foundations, housing agencies, and even some municipalities have embraced the whole family approach. In fact, later in this webinar, we'll share a resource that is a case study of a community action agency that is a public, so therefore a municipal community action agency, and how they have embraced a whole family approach to their work. Next slide, please. So again, speaking to Head Start and how there's such a strong connection, and Head Start does make a really great platform for launching the whole family approach initiative. And that's because if you're familiar with the Head Start model, then you know that from its very inception in 1965, Head Start has been serving both children and the adults in their lives. But if you were to revisit the two-gen or whole family approach continuum that Tamira has shared with you, where we saw whole family in the center, and then there are child focused interventions to the left of the continuum. But then somewhere in between there's child focused with parent components, and that's really where Head Start by its design sits. Head Start is primarily a service that is provided for young children, and the parent and family engagement piece is critical to Head Start. It's certainly among the outcomes that are tracked for Head Start, but it is supplemental to the outcomes for children. However, because Head Start already has such a strong infrastructure that allows for connecting with families of the children that are enrolled in Head Start, this is why we support it as an excellent platform for launching a whole family approach initiative, because that infrastructure and way of thinking as a family, as a comprehensive unit, is already in place. Next slide, please. And so where are there overlaps and differences in whole family approach and Head Start? Again, both are serving children and their parents or the adults in their lives simultaneously. Want to add to that or qualify that to say that the service again is equally as intense and intentional for both the child and the adult in the household. It is of a sufficient dosage and duration to make a significant difference for the household. And then we're also tracking outcomes, and we're giving great care to tracking the outcomes for both the children and the adults in their household. And the things that we're tracking, the data points that we're tracking, are relative in such a way that they will ultimately lead to social and economic mobility for that family. So examples for parents would be we're tracking outcomes that speak to their ability to provide for their family or to generate wealth. Again, as Tamira just said, we're no longer looking for family supporting wage, but we're wanting to see families move into thriving and prosperity. And so we're looking for thriving and wealth building wages and assets. And where the children are concerned in that equation is, are we tracking and recognizing outcomes that are developmentally appropriate for the child, that they speak to the child's ability to maintain social and economic mobility and momentum even into adulthood. So some examples of that would be reading on grade level, or access and engagement with the appropriate healthcare facilities. Are they getting their vaccines? Are they routinely visiting the dentist and the optometrist? Are they getting the care that they need? So there's some overlap there, clearly, between a whole family approach to serving families and how Head Start works with families. The biggest difference is in the duration. Unfortunately, a Head Start by its design is limited in the amount of time that we can engage with the family, so that even if a child and their family were to enroll an early Head Start and receive comprehensive, holistic, integrated services throughout the duration of the time that that child were enrolled in early Head Start and Head Start, we may see some significant development or movement of that family and their socioeconomic status within, those few years. Unfortunately, we simply do not have by its design, the duration of time that we need to realize social and economic mobility for most families during the time that they're enrolled in Head Start. But again, Head Start is an excellent place to start. Measuring outcomes and impacts for both children and their parents should be centered on families, and take a coaching methodology, or employ a coaching methodology to engaging with families, rather than simply being a case manager or even an advocate. Really working side by side with the family, but allowing the family to lead, particularly in the goal setting and in the decision making. Because a whole family approach, one of the hallmarks that's absolutely critical to whole family approach is to recognize and respect that families are the experts in their own lived experience. We want to attend to core life skills and executive functioning. So we know that we track outcomes for child development in Head Start, but also recognizing that we're never too late for parents to develop core life skills and sharpen their own executive functioning skills. So the same way that we're working to develop life skills for children, whole family approach says that we work with parents the same way. We, of course, center equity in all of our work, beginning with racial equity, both in Head Start, and again, it is a hallmark of a whole family approach. And both require that we develop partnerships. And this comes as no surprise to anyone on this call, because you're all here because you're either in community action or you know of community action. And we know that unfortunately, the truth is we never have enough resources to meet all of the needs of the families that we want to serve. And so it is absolutely critical that we develop partnerships both within our organizations and with our external community partners. As Tamaritis mentioned, there are those 6 core components of a whole family approach. And the pieces that each family will receive will differ based on what that family needs. However, we encourage organizations that are looking to implement a whole family approach to the way they do business to be sure that in those areas where you don't provide direct services and interventions, that be sure that you develop really strong partnerships in your community so that you are able to provide holistic and wraparound services for the families that you're working with. Next slide, please. Think we're going to where to begin. So you got it now. You understand what whole family approach is. You know a little bit about what it isn't. It isn't a program. It's an approach. It's a philosophy. It's a methodology, a framework. You pick the synonym that you'd like, but it's not a program. It's a way that we do business. And so we decided that we want to do business in a different way. We want to accelerate our impact for families. We want to catalyze families to realize social and economic mobility. How do we best do that? Where do we even get started? Next slide, please. We're going to start with the why. The same place that you'd start with any change initiative that you're implementing in your organization is, to really evaluate your organization's vision for children and the adults in their lives. Or you may frame it as families or individuals or customers or family partners. I've heard our clients referred to recently. But what is the vision for children and the adults in their lives in our community? And how does that vision align with the work that we're doing? What is that purpose and mission rather that drives our organization? And are we able to accomplish that mission under the current business model that we're currently working in? Or does it really require, and I dare say that it does, require a more integrated, comprehensive, wraparound, holistic approach to working with families? And then what is your strategic plan say about the direction of your agency and your strategic commitments? And I think once you have evaluated and given a real critical eye to your vision, mission, and purpose and your strategic plan, you'll recognize the value that taking a whole family approach can have and again, in accelerating the impact that you have with families in your community. So if the question is, where do we begin? We begin with the foundation of our work. We remember our why. If you go back and revisit with the Whole Family 101 webinar, we spend a bit of time discussing the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, which is the foundational document and legislation that gave birth to the community action movement as we know it today. And in that foundational legislation, it is explicitly spelled out that the goal, the mission, the purpose of community action as a whole is to accelerate social and economic mobility, in so much as that the vision is that every individual in this country will recognize their full potential and contribute to society to the fullest of their extent, to their best potential and possibility. And we know that one way to do that is by helping folks to realize their full potential and gain social and economic mobility through a whole family approach. Next slide, please. So now you've evaluated your mission, your vision, your strategic plan, and you've decided that yes, whole family approach is the way we want to do business going forward. It's how we want to accelerate our impact. So since it's not a program that we're going to roll out, it's a framework that we're going to employ and put into place or implement. Where do we start? So we're going to start with some whole family approach building blocks. And in just a moment, Tamarius will share a little bit more with you about the whole family approach building blocks and how they can be used, how they can be applied to your early implementation work. I also want to highlight the whole family approach design plan. So this is an open source workbook of sorts that's available at NCAP's website for free to all of our Community Action Network members and the public at large. And it really is, as its name indicates, it's a design plan. There are multiple components to the design plan that you would ideally pull together or convene a task force or work group within your organization. We refer to them in the design plan as a guiding coalition, from up, down, and across your organization. So from all levels of leadership, every rung of the hierarchical ladder, from intersectional, so from different programs, to pull together a group to walk through the design plan together. And we'll share a little bit more about some key components of the design plan, but it really has been designed to be as user-friendly as possible, that you just start at the beginning, and it will even help you to determine the questions in the worksheets will help you determine who should be on your guiding coalition, who from your organization or your community should you invite to be part of this design process. But before you jump into the design plan, you might be curious and asking, well, is our organization even ready for a whole family approach? And when that question comes up, we refer folks to the whole family approach building blocks. And again, on NCAP's website, there is a link to an open source resource guide that not only defines each of the whole family approach building blocks, which Tamarius is going to share with us in just a moment, but also shares a list of resources for each of the building blocks to help you better understand what they are and how you can strengthen those particular areas within your agency. So I've made multiple promises that Meredith is going to speak about the whole family approach building blocks. I'll pass it to you now, Meredith. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are some big shoes to fill. Okay, next slide, Denise. Thank you. All right, so as you heard Jennifer mentioned, right, when you think about, are we ready to do this? Like, what does the readiness look like? How can I measure the readiness? Well, with all of our years of learning and all of our knowledge, right, from our subject matter experts, from our peer expert cores, from our families who are living this every day, these are the building blocks here that lets you know if you are ready. And on the next slide, we're not going to go there yet, but on the next slide, we're going to dive a little deeper. These are kind of just really those high level areas when we're thinking about our readiness. So engaging cross-sectional leadership team, we want to ensure that we have leaders from all departments, all sections of our organization if we are truly thinking about implementing an agency or organization-wide whole family approach. Attending to organizational culture and systems. Securing funding and other resources. Aligning high quality, intentional, and intensive services to parents and children. Building and engaging family leadership. Parent and child service integration. Catalyzing systems and policy change that supports parents and children, and centering equity in design and implementation. Let's go to the next slide so we can deconstruct these building blocks a little. Thank you. So the first thing that we see on here is develop a theory of change and logic model. Why? Why is that the first one? That's the first one because that will give us our who, right? Our what, our why, our how, right? It's like the high level blueprint for what our vision is, for what we're wanting to implement, for what we're wanting to see within our agency and within our community. Utilizing target population and recruitment protocols. Realigning organizational structure and supervision. So when I break just this little topic down a little bit, I do want to mention there may be such changes as job descriptions, right? There may be some roles within the agency that change to reflect that maybe that new vision that you have. So just take that into consideration. Distributing staffing and caseloads appropriately. This is going to be huge when implementing a whole family approach because we know at the end of the day, right, that if our staff members have huge loads, then they cannot effectively give time to the families that these families need. Training staff and new practice approaches. Completing comprehensive family assessments, individualizing work with families to enable them to set their own goals. So, right, this is shared power. So it's not us coming up with the goals for them, right? It's allowing our family to lead. It's allowing them to make the choices for their life with our assistance. Individualizing work with families to enable them to set their own goals. Sharing family goals across agency programs. That kind of goes back to that integrating processes, integrating services. Creating space for culturally specific family activities, or just specifically cultural families, right? We want to make space in our organization, in our protocols, in our processes, the way that we do this work, ensuring that all cultures feel valued, right? That we are being as culturally competent as possible in the way that we do our business. placing the burden of service coordination on systems and programs rather than on our families, consolidating the intake process again, coordinating family and staff planning, co-locating services, coordinating with partners to fill gaps and provide comprehensive services. You're going to hear that all the time, and that is because it is vital. It is vital to the approach, and it is vital to the sustainability of the approach. Provide high quality services that are evidence and science-based, right? We always want to make sure that we are modeling the best practices, using data to drive our decision making, disaggregating race data and examining services and results by race. If we are not doing that, then we cannot truly say we understand the differences or what is going on in our community or our neighborhood. Adopting an enterprise system, software, or application. Data collection and data analysis in a whole family approach is also very vital, including parents in your guiding coalition. You'll learn more about that later. Pursuing system changes that interrupt structural racism, finding ways to blend and braid funding streams. I believe we will get to that in a few slides, right, where we speak about funding and systems and how it is looked at previously and how it can possibly be looked at, and just allowing our outcomes and results, right, to drive our financial streams. And last but certainly not least on this list is incorporate strategic planning. Again, we've heard that a couple of times today, and we know how pivotal it is to ensure that our vision and our mission and our true outcomes are included in our strategic plan so that we can see our vision, we can see our future. And so now we are going to jump into the theory of change and logic model. I know a lot of times these can either seem confusing, right? And they can also look different. We know that with our logic models and theories of change, there are different versions, but they all do the same. And so next slide, and I believe that Jennifer is going to kick us off with our
I
theory.
am. Tamaritis, thank you. Eh, Denise, if we could go back just really quickly to that last building block slide, and thank you, Tamaritis, for deconstructing the whole family approach building blocks for us. But I do want to reiterate here, as you said, that these are the building blocks, but by no means are we implying that your organization should check off all of the things on the list on the right-hand side of this slide, or that you should be at 100% completion or have completed all of these sections or building blocks before you launch your whole family approach implementation initiative, or you begin designing your whole family approach. We simply lift these up as, again, enabling conditions that, over 10 plus years of working with organizations and associations who are implementing whole family approach, these have been lifted up and identified as areas that are indicators of success for long-term whole family approach implementation agency-wide. And what that success looks like is accelerated social and economic mobility and increased impact for families. And so these are areas that an organization and its leadership should be prepared to look into and to potentially make some changes and shake things up a little bit as they're implementing whole family approach. But again, by no means do we intend to imply that you have to have all of these pieces in place, or that there's a checklist that you have to complete before you can begin designing your whole family approach plan. In fact, we think that as you go through the process of working through the whole family approach design plan, you will start to uncover and to surface areas within these building blocks, and maybe perhaps others within your organization that need to be massaged or addressed or looked into, further developed, if you will, before advancing whole family approach. So now we'll move on to the exciting theory of change. Next slide, please. Now we could do a whole webinar really a whole webinar series on developing the theory of change and how a theory of change and a logic model are two different things. But we wanted to share this example here today with the limited amount of time that we have to assure you that there's nothing to fear when it comes to a theory of change or a logic model. In fact, if you are using the Whole Family Approach design plan from our website, you'll notice here in your top right-hand corner where it says vision is component 1. So as we mentioned, there are multiple components to the design plan. And as you work through the design plan, there are worksheets for each component. So that when you get to the end where the theory of change is, it really is plug and play from the previous work that you and your whole family team or your guiding coalition have done. You will simply flip back to the first component in your design plan, pull that vision out and plug it in here for your theory of change. And the same will follow suit for the other areas here. Really what your theory of change is intended to articulate is we have a vision for this future. And we believe, so your theory of change statement on your right-hand side here is, we believe if we do X, then the Y change will occur. So if we go to the next slide, we have an example that we can lift up. So if we provide comprehensive, customized supports to children and the adults in their lives to help them achieve developmental milestones, social connectedness, and economic stability, we then have the best opportunity to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty in our community. Now, everybody can't cut and copy and paste and take this theory of change statement. Again, because it will be different for your community. The outcomes that you see there on the left-hand side that you're hoping to achieve for children, parents, and families will be different based on the needs of the families in your community. The activities, so the services and interventions that you'll apply, even the methodology used to apply those services. Again, speak to family-centered coaching there. The partnerships that you'll develop, they'll all be different. Based again on what your organization is already offering, what the needs of the families you serve are, and what resources and partnerships are available within your community. And so again, once you have completed your design plan and you've done the worksheets, completing your theory of change really is a matter of plug and play from the earlier worksheets. But you're not limited or boxed in to using this particular format for your logic or your theory of change. Next slide, please, Denise. Here we have an example from another organization and this is an actual community action organization and their theory of change. And we see that they've moved things around a little bit. They've identified the links, and there's a component within the design plan that helps you also identify linkages, their target population. And so your theory of change doesn't have to follow any particular form, as long as ultimately you're getting to your theory of change statement, which is essentially if we do X, then Y will happen. Next slide, please. Now, altogether different, not altogether different, but certainly different from a theory of change is a logic model. And those of you who are familiar with Roma or who have been through Roma training, then will look very familiar to you. But much like the theory of change template or worksheet that we just shared, the Whole Family Approach logic models within the design plan workbook are the same philosophy of plug and play. You can refer back to previous worksheets that you've completed, previous components of the design plan to fill out your logic model. What's important here in your logic model, it helps us to really document in a very clear and succinct way of the inputs that we want to apply. So the raw resources that we have to invest in the change that we want to see, the services and activities or interventions that will result as an outcome of applying those resources, the outputs. So what are the numbers that we will produce, and what will be the outcomes, both short-term and long-term, for the parent, the child, family, and even our agency. And we've even seen some organizations that embrace a whole family approach that have a community logic model. They're tracking the investment they're making to see change in their community, and they're tracking outputs and outcomes as a result of their efforts in helping to develop their community. What's really important to note here, and as we move to the next slide, we'll see an example of a completed logic model. What's important to note here is where this particular organization, again, this is an organization's logic model that we're sharing as an example. You'll see that under services and activities, they have it broken down into 3 categories. So there's parent, child, and family. And the same is true for the outputs and the outcomes. It's parent, child, and family. While this organization was, industrious and consolidated their logic models into a singular document, we do strongly encourage, whether you put all of the logic models together in a single document or whether you have a separate logic model document for each audience, we strongly encourage you to go through the effort as the exploratory work to create logic models for the parent, child, family, at least, and the agency. And here's why. Again, we remind you that for a whole family approach to be a whole family approach or a multi-generational approach, we're applying equal intention and intensity to working with both the child and the parent. And too often when the outcomes and the outputs are all jumbled together, and they're not broken out, at least the way we've seen it here by category, what we document is what gets done. And we measure what matters, right? And so it's a way of helping us to keep our eye on the goals that we've set for the outcomes for our families and the parent and the child. And it helps us to see where maybe our approach or our design of our whole family approach plan may be lacking in some child-focused areas or in some parent-focused areas. And if everything's jumbled together into a single logic model, it's harder to recognize where the gaps may be. So again, we strongly encourage, and the design plan workbook allows for multiple logic models. So at the very least, we'd encourage a parent, child, and family logic model for any organization that's pursuing a whole family approach. Next slide, please. And I think now Meredith is going to talk to us a little bit more about some of the outcomes that you might see in your multiple logic models.
Yes. So again, these are just examples of SIM outcomes that our whole family approach is designed to achieve. And so again, you see it broken down by parents, children and youth, family, and community. Healthy parents, family supporting employment. I just want to throw this out as well, that the mix of the services that you provide to parents and children together, of course, may look differently depending on the target population. Children and youth, healthy children meeting their developmental milestones. Family, parents and children being engaged in family life, healthy relationships, and the cycle of poverty is broken. And of course, our community, families being better connected and able to participate in civil life, and a community having an ecosystem of partners that works together to support young families and children. We will dive more into that later. But Jennifer, I want to jump into the grants systems because I know we're a little low on time.
Absolutely. And it's a great segue, Meredith, into our promotion for next month's Whole Family Approach webinar, where we talk about Whole Family Approach 301, blending and braiding of resources for Whole Family Approach sustainability. Next slide, please, Denise. So what have we been learning? And we can go ahead to the grants management model. This probably looks very familiar to folks on the call. This is how a lot of organizations are currently operating. The services and interventions that we provide are dictated by the funding source. And we know it is expected and required of us. Community action is nothing if not compliant. And so we will be compliant to those funding sources. We will produce high quality services for children and families in our communities, and we will realize outcomes for families. Unfortunately, what this business model lacks is in connectivity for families. And so what you can find within an organization is that even in an organization that may only have these four columns, these four departments, there may be a child who's enrolled in Head Start whose family is receiving services from community service. They're also receiving housing vouchers or weatherization services for their housing, and they have to fill out 4 different applications at least. They have to speak to 4 different advocates or case managers. And in some cases, these departments are not co-located, so they're in different facilities within a county or service area. So the family really has the burden of getting from place to place and speaking to all the different people. And it's a burden on the staff within an organization because you may be missing key components of a family story because by the time they got to you, they didn't want to tell the story all the way again, or you're not getting the benefit of being able to measure all of the outcomes that are secondary to the services that you're providing for the family. And so a whole family approach requires us to look at the way we do business a little different. Again, not a program, it's a methodology, it's an approach to doing business. Next slide, please. Looks a little bit more like this. This is the community action impact model, which really centers the agency's strategic priorities. And while every community action agency and the population they serve is different, what is true of all community action agencies is that their priorities are to impact the family, the impact community and the systems that operate the community, and to have impact within its own agency. And so when those impact goals are set up as our strategic priorities, then we start to think about what outcomes do we want to see. So again, we remind you, we said, where do we start? Well, we start with rethinking our vision and our mission. What reality do we want to be true for families in our community? So what outcomes would need to happen in order for that reality to become truth? And then we think about strategies. So, and what interventions or services can we provide that would help to foster the outcomes that we want to see for families? And then that is how we design our programming and how we connect and deploy our programming in our communities in such a way as that it builds back up to meeting our strategic priorities, which is ultimately to impact families. And so, this takes a little bit of creativity when it comes to how we fund our programs and our strategies when we take this approach. So we really encourage you to join us again next month for Whole Family Approach 301, where we will have seasoned Whole Family Approach practitioners joining us to share their story of how their organization has successfully blended and braided funding sources from a variety of outlets to support the long-term implementation of Whole Family Approach in their organization. And I recognize that we're right up at time. So Denise, if we can open the floor for any questions that folks might have as we close out. We invite you to drop them into the chat or into the Q&A function here in Zoom. And then if we can advance ahead, Denise, do we have for more information slide that we can share? We also welcome you to email any one of us directly with any questions that you might have. I encourage you to check out NCAP's Whole Family Approach landing page on our website, again, where our open source resources are available. In addition to the case study that we mentioned, you can go back, there we go, to the case study that we mentioned, the open source design plan, and the Whole Family Approach Building Blocks resource guide. You will also find recordings of previous webinars and links to our YouTube channel and highlights of presentations made at previous Whole Family Approach convenings. So a wealth of resources that are available for you on our website. And with that, we thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope that we'll see you again next month for Whole Family Approach 301. And in the meantime, please keep a lookout for NCAP's weekly newsletter, e-news, because there is a new webinar every Wednesday on a variety of topics, and we hope to see you back here soon. Thanks, everyone. Take care.